So maybe you put on the archetypal shoes of Lilith, for example, who is one of the dark feminine figures we'll be working with. And she left the garden because she didn't want to be subordinated to Adam, and though because of that she was cast as this demon and literally is in the books as this demon figure because she wanted to beat her own drum instead of bowing to somebody else's. And so maybe we can play that we're Lilith for a moment and just step into that space. And what does it feel like to just be really, in your own truth and in your own authority? And maybe, it's not quite as dangerous an act as you have this story telling you that it is. You've created a shadow that makes you not express that for your safety, but maybe it is safe for you to step into that in some way. And so if you can begin to explore that within yourself, whether that be through private writing or movement or anything that allows that energy to move, because this is all energy, remember. The next phase of that is allowing it to be witnessed, because once it's seen by other people, it loses its power even more.
So today we're going to be welcoming Morgan, who is here to speak to us about the dark feminine, alchemy, some Jungian archetypal sort of energy. And her and I actually are going to be combining forces for an upcoming workshop here in Sydney. But we're really passionate about this topic. So, firstly, I'll just get Morgan to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I guess I'm an alchemist. I've spent a lot of time studying all of the ancient writings about this process and learning about it, particularly in the Jungian context of the way that it's the art of personal transmutation and coming into a more aligned, authentic, whole state of self. And so, yeah, I've done an honors degree where I did my thesis providing a Jungian exploration of the alchemy themes within W.B. Yeats's work, because he spent a lot of time working through all of those as well. And I'm also a poet, and I have a poetry series rooted in alchemy, and yeah, lots of work coming about where we're kind of looking at the symbols of the world and seeing how they are clues to portals through the shadow, I guess. And yeah, that's kind of what we're going to be working on in our workshop next week. So
Yeah.
looking at it through the dark feminine archetypal lens there.
Yeah. So, you know, what we're really looking at as well, and what I really wanted to talk to Morgan about today in this public forum, is really the cyclical nature of who we are as people that have wombs, as women, and what that means in that connection to nature. So, here in the Southern Hemisphere, we are moving into a descent or going into, I like to think of it, the autumn equinox as we go into winter and the cooler months. It's much like a cave. And in that cave, it's very similar to a womb as well, and it gets dark. And that dark has this creative energy and this creative force, which, relates so much to the work that you're all about as well. So, you were talking about your creativity and how that is very much an alchemical vessel or vehicle for you, or container or medium. I don't know, so many different types of words to talk about that. So, I mean, how do you feel about this seasonal connection, and how does it relate to or everything that you're feeling right now and that you're about and that you want to share with the world or with other people and women and yeah, all of that?
Well, the whole, I guess, pretty much my entire path with all of this came through a connection to the seasons. And it began with looking at the language of nature and trying to figure out the ways that the symbols of the plants can give us clues to the processes that are going on inside of us, and the way that the symbols that they present can help us to access the medicine, I guess, and recognizing that there is this narrative language, which is the deepest medicine, and access the emotional space and the energetic space. And actually had an experience with a pomegranate tree, which was a catalyst for pretty much everything that I do today. And I had this one plant and it lost its leaves through the autumn and through the winter. And I'd spent most of my time before that traveling around. So I hadn't really rooted myself into the seasonal processes of plants. And so I wasn't sure what was happening. I was nervous the entire winter that it was dead and it was gone. And then when its leaves came back in spring, there was this overwhelming sense of relief that I can't even put into words. I was just like, just plugged into this, like, oh, I can feel it rising in me now. I've got like goosebumps. It was just like, I don't know, this connection that felt so powerful. And I started looking into it and recognizing that the pomegranate was tied to the myth of Persephone. And way back in the ancient Greek periods, they had these priestesses who every fall equinox would lead people on this journey that was a mythological ritual reenacting the story of Persephone. And so by aligning with the seasons, they would recognize that as the world is falling, the story of Persephone tells us that she would go into the underworld at this time of year, and her mother would walk around the world weeping. And so all of the crops on earth would die because she was the plant goddess. And so we're connecting to this story that is as old as time. But on the other side of that, if we can get into the mindscape of Persephone, we see that when she goes down into the underworld, she's the underworld queen. And so she has this sovereign relationship to it. And even though the first time she went into that space, she was dragged down and could have fallen into a victim mindset, we see how she is able to rise above that and become a queen of that. And then by walking that path, we can plug into that in a metaphorical way by exploring the shadow self, which is representative of the underworld, and see that it is basically the state that we are continuously being called into throughout our lives anyway. There'll always be moments where you're triggered into certain unconscious confrontations where you maybe react in a way that you didn't want to react in a situation, or maybe it's that there's an obvious suppression in some way, like you feel depressed or you feel anxious, or there's some energy that you can feel within you that is blocked and not coming through. And all of that is just that confrontation with the unconscious, which is what Jung refers to it as. And it's just recognizing that we have these shadows that are ruling our life and dictating our experiences. And the society that we live in is very much in a masculine solar mindset, which is all about the outward doing. And we need to take that time, which autumn gives us a perfect invitation to do, to turn within, to see what's really going on in there, recognize that there are probably some really beautiful and powerful things within us that haven't had a chance to come through. And by looking in instead of out, following the path of the trees whose energy goes to their roots, we're going into ourselves and connecting to our own roots, our own story, and allowing that to communicate itself in a way that will let us come back to earth in spring, as the beautiful spring maiden Persephone does.
There you go. And that, I mean, I can already feel how deeply inspiring that message is, and the power of symbolism and story, myth, and this kind of movement. And you're talking about the shadows and, going into the underworld and, taking what needs to be taught in this sort of, as I was saying before, this cave like womb like connection, and this also this lunar, where the feminine is connected with the lunar energy, whereas we've been living in this world that is kind of disconnected from that cyclical nature, and it's very much connected to just this masculine sun energy, which definitely has its power and medicine as well, but it's a reclamation of that balance, in my understanding. But you're talking about this journey as well. And I know that you're also interested in the heroine's journey. too, which is something that we're touching upon in our upcoming workshop. But it's something that's really powerful for women to understand, because we know that Joseph Campbell has the hero's journey, which is about um, its aim is really to get the princess. At the end of the day, is the prince that's slaying the dragons, and he gets the princess. But then there's this feminine side, or this side for the woman. There's a lot of nuance to this. Gender topics, but let's just keep it basic for today's discussion. And then we have the heroine's journey. So, how do you connect going into the underworld and this connection of what is happening for the feminine that is actually quite different to the hero's journey in this experience? What do you sort of make, and how does that connect with your work, if it does at all?
Yeah, it connects a lot. And there's a few different layers that you could take when you're looking at that. I think the first thing that comes up is recognizing that this story is a cultural story. It's
Mm,
not just limited to the personal story. It is something that has been observed. Maureen Murdoch is the woman who coined the phrase the heroine's journey and created this alternate pathway, which follows Joseph Campbell's journey in that it is this cyclical nature. But she recognized that women have for a long time been put in a masculine framework instead of the feminine thing. And so that ties back to so many different prophecies and observations in different cultures, that there is a shift within society as well, that we have periods where there is like a masculine dominance and periods where there's a feminine dominance.
mm,
And that can be broken down further to not just being like men rule versus women rule, but the energies within that. So the outward active striving versus the inward observing and alchemizing.
yeah.
And so what Maureen was noticing was that women specifically were walking this path that was suited to a more masculine framework, which was that outward striving, that very the call to adventure. You set forth and you slay the dragon and then you return a hero. And she was recognizing that wasn't reading the feminine model, more gentle, soft, inwards descent journey. And so we can look at that in the way that she was presenting it, which is that the first part of it is acknowledging that you are essentially a woman in a man's world and you've been striving for these active, outward, masculine pursuits, but maybe you haven't had a time to really look within.
Mm,
And we can look at that in so many ways. Like something that is coming up for me at the moment, I'm recognizing that having just emerged from the journey of motherhood, which even though that is something that is typically a feminine thing, my energies are completely outside of myself. My energies are bound up watching this little creature and putting everything into her survival. And so I haven't had enough opportunity within that space to come back into my space and see what's happening and unfolding and the intense transformation that is taking place within me within that. And so then you can see that that starts to come into the next phase when you recognize that there are maybe things coming up within you that you can feel are not quite resonant with how you want to be. Like maybe you've got rage coming up and you're like, okay, this is not feeling good. What's going on? Basically, you have that moment of recognition where you're like, something needs to change because this isn't feeling good. And so at that moment, you're invited to turn within. And instead of going off to slay the dragon, you're turning within and confronting your own shadows and seeing what it is that you've got blocking that gold that is within you, inside you, to use alchemical terms. And it's that little essence of soul that we want to bring forth. And so we can come into that space and we can see that there is this really beautiful, powerful, creative, magnetic, sensual force that wants to move within us, but it hasn't had space because we've been so busy looking outwards and tending to everything else.
mm.
So, yeah, when we're doing the heroine's path as opposed to the heroes, we're coming into ourselves and experiencing that softening around that essence within us and allowing it to rise up and come out from that really deep womb or cave-like space within us.
Yeah, and going into that space though, you were talking about the, alchemy, and we also discuss the archetypes. And on this journey of going within, you are sort of, you were talking about Persephone, but there are so many different facets of the dark feminine, because she's sort of known as a, what did you say, the queen of the underworld. So that is one of the faces of the dark feminine, and it is cross cultural. I know in Balinese and Indonesian storytelling, there is this story of Rangda, who is fights against Barong, who is the epitome of good, but there is no winner in the battle. And if you've been to Bali before, which a lot of people these days have been, they have these dances, which are ceremonial dances, which are only conducted at specific times in the calendar, in the Balinese calendar. But she was a witch. But before that, she was a woman, a bride, a queen, in Java, and went to, became a widow and got shunned and sent to the island of Bali as a witch, because people couldn't understand the depth. As a mythological story, people couldn't understand the depth of her grieving, of her pain, of her darkness, and what she was experiencing as this feminine sort of archetype in the shades of the shadow. Instead, that world kind of demonized her, which happens so often in these phases of the dark feminine, where it gets demonized, but it's in this particular story, there's no winner. It's always about finding that balance, because in shadow work and darkness and the dark feminine, it's all about that balance. But I was just sort of prompted to think about that in terms of the way art is used to express this kind of exploration of story. And I know previously I've had a conversation with you in regards to alchemy, and how communal spaces can be used as a kind of container. And this has been something that's happened cross culturally from before spoken language, from what we know from archaeology and history, is, people would come together in the cave with the elements and express something that was happening more than an intellectual level. And this is where the healing and the alchemy happen. And this is something that you have discussed with me in terms of how is this transmutation, this alchemical process happening in the creative space, whether it's the independent process of poetry, which I know you're an advocate for, or can you tell me more about that process for you and your understanding?
Yeah, so I think where we've explored is something that you have an interesting perspective on as well, which I like the alignment, and we'll get into that next. But when you're doing the alchemical journey, the way that I understand it, at least, you come to that space first, you see the shadow, basically you acknowledge what it is that is coming up against you and holding you down. You go into the shadow and see that there is maybe an inner child who has created a narrative around this event that occurred as a child or whatever, and put that aspect in the shadow. So then the next phase, and this is so important, and this is where a lot of the work gets left out, is you need to play with that shadow and explore it and move it and like allow it to see that it is this narrative space, and allow that energy to be expressed through it. And so maybe you can play act as that shadow. If it's, for example, the shadow is something that you maybe you had an experience where if you acted a particular way, you were persecuted. And so you act in that way, regardless of the persecution that you think is occurring. You wear the cloak of that persecution. And so maybe you put on the archetypal shoes of Lilith, for example, who is one of the dark feminine figures we'll be working with. And she left the garden because she didn't want to be subordinated to Adam, and though because of that she was cast as this demon, and literally is in the books as this demon figure, because she wanted to beat her own drum instead of bowing to somebody else's. And so maybe we can play that we're Lilith for a moment and just step into that space. And what does it feel like to just be really, in your own truth and in your own authority? And maybe, it's not quite as dangerous an act as you have this story telling you that it is. You've created a shadow that makes you not express that for your safety, but maybe it is safe for you to step into that in some way. And so if you can begin to explore that within yourself, whether that be through private writing or movement or anything that allows that energy to move, because this is all energy, remember,
And
we
movement.
start to activate it. Yeah. And so then the next phase of that is allowing it to be witnessed, because once it's seen by other people, it loses its power even more. It's one thing to wear that in front of the mirror and say, yeah, cool, this is fine, I can play with this. But then if you show that to another person, if you move like that in front of another person, if you tell a story that another person listens to, and you see that the story that you had about this thing being so horrible and so bad is maybe just something that is actually very relatable or very, very true and very fine and very safe, then that shadow has lost its power. And so that's the space of integration. That's, yeah, the final point of the heroine's journey as well, where those two forces have been reconciled. And it is, yeah, allowing yourself to be in relationship with that. So I liked what you were saying in terms of the narrative therapy about how that's such a key element of that as well. And I think, yeah, it's interesting to hear all sides of it. So I'd love to hear as well if you can tell a little bit more about that.
I think in narrative therapy, so if you're just tuning in for the first time, I am a counselor, and one of my modalities is sort of expanding on narrative therapy, but I sort of connect to it on a level that is connected more to Indigenous cultures, because that's a big part of narrative therapy. Michael White, who is the one that created narrative therapy, he just gives you a map of how it could be. And there are some ideas on how to process and heal and experience and integrate and grow and connect with shadow and whatnot. But one of the, and it's very, he actually studied Indigenous cultures and how they do things, because there's wisdom in that. There's wisdom in oral storytelling, which has been so put to the side in Western modern civilization. Like there's no respect or reverence for the power of oral storytelling. It's like, oh, if it's not written in a book, it's got no power. Anyway, I could really go on a tangent there. But so it's this communal space, and in cultures across the world, you see how communal community, like in Australian Aboriginal Indigenous culture, they have the yarning circle, which is coming together. You have the elders, you have, the people in the community, and it works in that community space of expression and discussion and movement. And then they have dances and all different kinds of things. But the key element to that relates to narrative therapy is that community space and being witnessed. And it's kind of like putting all the energy into that container, because that space, that group space, is a container, and putting that energy in there, letting it sort of shadows come to light, and then that sort of dissipates, and the energy of the collective sort of it transmutes what has occurred in that art space, so, or that expressive space. So that's something that we'll be touching upon in the workshop as well. But it is, one of the key reasons, like we could have done this as a digital forum, which we are considering, but we really wanted to use this space in the physical form, because there's so much power in that physical space. That's why women's circles are really growing in popularity. Not just women, like you have group therapy, which I studied some group therapy, and then the dynamic that happens in that community space is it's really powerful. Like AA meetings and whatnot. People's shadows are being witnessed in community, and that is a part of healing. And sometimes you're not actually looking for an answer. And I know you've mentioned this before. You're not trying to fix something. It's just about allowing, it's like you ate something bad and then you burp, and that burp comes out and everyone's like, whoa, that was a big burp. And then that's that's kind of
The
what it
process.
is. It's the process, the digestive system. And that's kind of the same,
Exactly.
analogy in that group setting, and that's the power of that, in terms of alchemy, creativity, movement, witnessing the shadows, and then that interconnection with the natural elements and the cycles, and there's just so much there. I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to add that came to mind as you were sort of, because this is all quite in a nutshell, but we just wanted to briefly speak upon it, because it is so powerful. If you are unable, you're not in Sydney and you're not able to come to this, I think it's really important to either create your own with some friends or people, or find a space where you can be in that community setting, because we're not alone in this world. We are moving as a collective, and we are expanding and evolving. But did you have anything else that you wanted to sort of add to the depth of that?
I guess just highlighting the process, that it's completely natural and it's something that we are going through all the time, whether or not we're aware of it. And the the reason that we can get stuck in cycles of feeling like we don't know ourselves, don't recognize ourselves, or have aspects coming up that are, akin to birth, that maybe are not the most pleasing thing to be, adding to the world, wanting to be able to go into that and just like take back our power, realize that we are sovereign of this space, so we don't have to be a victim to it. Walking that path of Persephone, that is literally allowing yourself to become aware of what's happening in there and redirecting it into a way that is more nourishing and more healing. And so a lot of people, when I try to not hold to the terms themselves too tightly, because the same thing with any kind of narrative story, people have their own stories in mind about it that are completely unconscious. But the idea that is being communicated through it is the real power of it. And that is, this dark feminine is literally just representative of a shadowed expression that is sensual and mystical and magical and free and creative. And it's just that part that we haven't allowed ourselves to embrace. And so by doing this process of, looking within, bringing it out, being witnessed in the group space, seeing that it's okay to allow that part of ourself, that creative, nourishing, nurturing, light feminine part to emerge, it moves it from the shadow into a really beautiful expression. And so,
Mm.
yeah, I think that's really what this is all about. And it's something that, as you say, can be done anywhere. But if you can have a space where you can do it with a group, it adds so much to the experience. It really brings that final homecoming piece to it. So that's what most people don't have access to in our society. As you say, we don't have those storytelling circles very often in this world. And so that's the feminine rising as well. That's bringing it back to that space where we can journey in and journey out, and in and out and in and out, and take that
Round and
Persephone path.
round.
Yeah. And weave all of our gold through the world.
Exactly. I think that's the key points there. And yeah, I think if you can make it, I mean, I don't know when your person listening, if you can make it to our workshop, I mean, this is only going to be released a week beforehand, and hopefully we are able to expand on this offering that we've got to community. As well, you're welcome to attend. It is in the Sutherland Shire in Darragol country, but I'll put that information in the details here. But I think that is such compact information. There's so much to consider there, but I think we will close up today's discussion.
Happy
Thank
digesting.
you, Justin, and good luck with the burps. Thank you so much for joining us. You can actually work with, like, um, learn more about Morgan on her Instagram page, which is morgan.azali.
Morgan Azali, no dot.
Morgan Azali on, and she also sells some beautiful um, blue lotus and other types of plant products as well. But I will finish off today.